Hi, everybody. Welcome along to our small, intimate, but hopefully, oh, God bless you,
Impactful.
Insightful panel. We're delighted to have you. So my job as MC is basically to get out of the way of the real panelists. I'll just briefly introduce them and introduce myself. So first of all, myself, my name is David McNeil. I long ago passed into kind of old fart territory at the FCCJ because I think I've been a member here for 22 years or something like that. I used to be a correspondent with The Independent, which is Richard's old newspaper, and then I was with The Economist for about 8 years. I still freelance for various newspapers, mainly the Irish Times, and I chair the Freedom of the Press Committee at the FCCJ. I struggle to talk about reviews, but I can tell you my limited experience. So, reading from my left, Steve doesn't like to be called left, but I'll do it anyway. Steve McClure is a Tokyo-based writer, editor, and narrator. He is a native of Vancouver, Canada, and has lived in Japan since 1985. From 1991 until 1999, he was Billboard magazine's Japan bureau chief and its Asia bureau chief from 1999 until 2008. His books include Nippon Pop, the first book in English on Japanese pop music, and the upcoming Japanese Rebels, Nonconformist in a Conformist Society, which I hear is a totally brilliant book. I'll
Co-written with this guy, right?
Co-written with me. Next up is Tim Horniak. Tim is also a Canadian, of course. He's written extensively over the last quarter of a century about travel, food, technology, science, culture, and business in Japan, as well as Japanese inventors, roboticists, and Nobel Prize-winning scientists. He's the author of Loving the Machine, The Art and Science of Japanese Robots, and you can find his writing in the New York Times, Nature, Science, Scientific American, and many other venues. He firmly believes, I'm getting this from his bio, he firmly believes that the greatest Japanese invention of all time is the onsen, and who could disagree? And then finally, Richard Lloyd Parry is the Asia editor of the Times of London. He was previously correspondent with my old newspaper, The Independent newspaper. His publications include People Who Eat Darkness, The Fate of Lucy Blackman, and Ghost of the Tsunami. About the tsunami, of course, of 2011. And he has just published a novel, which I've read, which is really brilliant. It's called In the Green Heart, and he may want to talk about that today. That's our three panelists. As I said, my job is to get out of the way. In preparation for this talk, I had a look around at what I've written recently, and the last book review I did was for the Irish Times, which was about 4 months ago. And it was called The Shortest History of Japan by Leslie Downer. I think you know Leslie, right? So it was already a short, well, it wasn't that actually short a book. It was quite long. But my review was 350 words. And I was really surprised, to have to write a review of 350 words. And apparently this is quite common now. And the Times has also asked me to write a review of a new book about Fukushima, which is 300 words. So I don't know what's going on, but the reviews' sizes seem to be shrinking. It's barely worth your while, or you feel it's barely worth your while, writing a review of 300 words because you have to read the book, unless you really like the book. And in many cases, what I'll do is if I'm proposing something, I'll make sure I like the book first. So I can talk a little bit more later maybe, but what I'll do is I'll hand over to each panelist in the order that I read them out. So from Steve, coming this way. Each panelist is going to talk for a couple of minutes, maybe 10 or so, about their experience. We encourage today, because it's a small enough crowd, we encourage today to be less, us talking down at you, more kind of a discussion, and feel free as well to ask questions about any aspect of journalism and to tap into the knowledge of these fantastic panelists. So with that, over to Steve.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody, for coming along this evening. You mentioned that reviews are becoming shorter. Well, in preparation for this evening's event, I looked up the shortest review ever, and that is Leonard Maltin's review of the 1948 musical isn't it romantic? And his review was no. So on a more serious note, I'd like to pose this question to you. What is the purpose of a review, right? Why do people write them and why do people read them? And I can start with my personal experience. I believe the first piece I ever had published in any sort of journalistic organ was in the student newspaper of my high school, and that was a review of George Harrison's 1974, obviously I date myself, the only date I can get these days, concert at the Pacific Coliseum in Vancouver. And it was a laudatory review. I liked the concert. I wrote it. Why did I write it? Because like any writer, I wanted to see my name in print, but more seriously, I wanted to share my impressions and entertain my readers, both of them, and inform. And I think that's what reviews do. And based on my personal experience, I've learned a lot through reading reviews about the subject of the review, but also about writing itself. And a good review should be clear expository prose. I can give you one example of a review that, and there have been many, where I was turned on to some artist or a book or an author that I knew nothing about. And I remember reading in Time magazine in 1977, Jay Cox's review of Marquee Moon by Television, a wonderful band. I'd never heard of them. And of all things, Time magazine alerted me to this new band, and this fantastic album, which is in my top 10 of all time. So I like a good review, even though I might not be interested in the subject. And restaurant reviews are an interesting example. We have a wonderful restaurant reviewer here in Tokyo, Robbie Swinnerton, who's just a damn fine writer. And I'm not necessarily interested in the restaurant or the cuisine that he's writing about, but I find his writing beautiful. I may be interested in going to the restaurant, but I learn a lot because I learn about culture, and specifically food culture, obviously, by reading his reviews. And I learn about people. So there's a didactic function of reviews, which I find very useful. Everybody likes a negative restaurant review, by the way. It's one of the finer art forms where there's just a series of put-downs and catty comments, and that can be self-indulgent. And that's the pitfall of review writing, when the writer, and applies to lots of other kinds of writing, I suppose, where the writer is enamored of his or her own mastery of the language, such that the actual subject is obscured by their prose, and it can be very self-indulgent, as I say. A good book review does the same thing. It educates, informs, and entertains. And this reminds me of my favorite comment about book reviews. Sidney Smith, English, 19th century, 18th century, I forget, writer said, "I never read a book before reviewing it. It prejudices a man so," which is pretty self-indulgent. And another great quote I came across, I just love quotes. This is a great example of quote drift, where you think somebody might have said it or should have said it. It's conventionally attributed to Dorothy Parker, but it could have been Damon Runyon. "This is not a novel to be tossed aside lightly. It should be thrown with great force." Yeah, there are lots of bon mots in the art of reviewing, but the thing that I'd like to conclude with, how are we doing for time?
Oh, good.
Yeah, okay, because I can go on and on. Everybody's a reviewer now. It used to be, and this is a function of social media, right? How many of us go to, we look at a restaurant and then Google reviews, and, we think, is that written by AI? Is that written by a friend of the manager of the restaurant? Or is this by a real person? And we've learned how to sift through, I think, speaking for myself, such reviews to find the kernel of truth. underneath them, and it's quite often, that the reviews are wrong. But it's really interesting how different people can have totally different experiences of the same place. And quite often, because it's social media, the people from the restaurant will respond, "Oh, sorry, you had a bad experience. We'll try to clean the place next time," or, "Sorry about the food poisoning," or whatever. So I think reviewing has become more democratic, but those of us who are in the trade, I think we still pride ourselves on maintaining some standard of objectivity and good writing. So the art of reviewing is not dead. It's entering a new phase. And I still read lots of reviews. Again, not necessarily about subjects that I'm interested in, but because I like reading what intelligent people write. So that's all I have to say about it. Over to you, young Tim.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for coming. It's a pleasure to be here. Continuing on that theme, for years I worked for Lonely Planet back in the days when travel guidebooks were bricks that people carried around with them all over continents like Europe and Africa and Asia. And it's been transformed so radically by online reviews, TripAdvisor, etc., Google reviews. But I come from the tradition of having a journalist go around to these places and look at them critically and check the information. So I just wanted to talk about that briefly. So Lonely Planet, grudgingly included the must-see attractions of a place, but it really emphasized unique experiences and the opposite of tourist traps. These places would have authenticity, and they would often convey something that was related to the local culture, especially important here in Japan. So they can offer memorable culinary or drinking, cultural or adventure experiences, for example, going to a jazz kisaten in Shimokitazawa, or doing Shugendo hiking trails around Mitake in Ome, west of central Tokyo. So I found that after doing, Lonely Planet sounds like a great gig, but there's a lot of drudgery associated with it. Like, go and check the 10 listed hotels in Shibuya to see if all the information is accurate. It's not so much fun at all. But on the other hand, you also get to go to the Ogasawara Islands on these gigs, which are absolutely fantastic. But after doing this for a while, you develop a kind of radar system for places that are great. And in one case that I remember well, I was walking around Asakusa Bashi, south of Asakusa, and I noticed this old wooden building right by the Sumida River, and right away my antennae just sort of, jumped up. And what is this place? It's weird to have an old wooden structure by the Sumida River because it's all been redeveloped. It turns out this structure was the home of a geisha who was very popular during the 20th century, and her name was Ichimaru. She was a singer, and so she was friends with a family that was bequeathed this property, and their daughter turned it into a cafe gallery. So I love this cafe gallery. It was all authentic wood. There were, the portraits of the geisha inside and stuff. And so later decided to have my wedding reception there, which was fun. So I think the key working for Lonely Planet was to find these special places. You don't want them to become, overpriced tourist traps. So you're always debating like, oh, this is a real gem. Should I put it in the guidebook or not? But, you also have to be aware that if you do put it in the guidebook, it may become a sort of burden for the owners or local people. So I went around, I remember going to Nikko and asking an old lady who was running a sort of a ryokan or a minshiku there. I'm like, oh, your place is wonderful. Would you mind if I put it in the Lonely Planet guidebook? And she's like, no, please don't. We don't want any more customers. So that was something to be aware of as a Lonely Planet writer. And, you always try to be fair. You only include the good stuff in the guidebook, of course. You don't include the bad stuff. So it was positive reviews of interesting places. I just wanted to talk briefly also about books. I do review books occasionally. I write for this magazine, Literary Review, which is published in London. This is, I think, the latest edition, and it has a review. I actually got to write something like 800 words, so I feel very lucky compared to David over there. I wrote this review of a book called The Traveling Tree, Lessons from a Nomadic Life by the photographer Michio Hoshino, who was famous for photographing bears in all these wildlife situations. Sadly, he himself was killed by a bear. Anyway, I read the other reviews in the magazine, and I try to ask myself, what makes a good review? And I think that a good review is one that will sort of draw you in right away, no matter the subject. And there's one in here that I was looking at in which the reviewer says, I've been talking about writing about international finance for the past 40 years, but this book has shown me that I don't know half of what I should know. So it should draw you in right away. You could use a dramatic scene, you could use a personal anecdote. I've myself used the story about this poor photographer who was eaten by a bear at the beginning of my review. You have to balance the need for describing what the book's about with avoiding spoilers naturally. That's always a delicate thing depending on the subject matter. Some people may dislike reviews that spend too many column inches describing something that is not precisely the book. For example, if it's a book about wildlife photography, I could start off by talking about, the latest UN Red List, which is describing species that are in danger before getting to the book. I don't mind that myself, but maybe some people don't like that at all. And as far as negative reviews, I have written some negative reviews in the past. I wrote one for the Japan Times about a novel set in Honshu, which mentioned cranes flying over the protagonist's residence. And as far as I understand, cranes do not fly through Honshu. They're only in Hokkaido. So I kind of took the writer to task for that. So that wraps up what I wanted to say. I think reviews are just a fascinating genre. I think there's a lot to be said for professional reviewers bringing class and depth and insight into the genre as opposed to, the quickie 2-minute Google reviews. So I am very sad when I hear about reviews getting short shrift, and I hope that we see a renaissance in reviews, that, we can have longer and more in-depth reviews. Thank you.
Thank you. Was the writer upset that you called her out on the crane story?
I think there was some blowback, yes.
There was some blowback? Yeah. Richard?
Thanks. Well, my career as a reviewer began disastrously and ignominiously early on in my career, where as a young journalist I was working in London for a lifestyle supplement of the Daily Telegraph. It was called You and Your Family. And I didn't have a family of my own and didn't really know what I was doing, but I was equipped with an excess of self-confidence. And I volunteered for one job, which was to go out and review sofas. They wanted a piece about sofas. So I became a sofa reviewer, and I went out into Tottenham Court Road, then had a lot of furniture shops. And I found 5 or 6 sofas, and I sat on them and felt the quality of the cushions. And I wrote a review of these sofas, and it was a catastrophic failure. It was a disgrace to journalism and to the Daily Telegraph and to me. And ever since then, I swore after that moment I would never touch furniture reviewing again, and I advise you to avoid it as well. It's fraught with peril. But what I have done since then, I write from time to time about the arts, about film, theatre, and so on. But generally that's in the form of interviews with people, and that's not the same as a review. A review is something very distinct. And the only things I really review are books. And I have 2 outlets for book reviews. One is a magazine called the London Review of Books. And that's really in a kind of category of its own. Those are long pieces, sometimes 5,000-6,000 words, even longer. And in the LRB, a book very often is, you have to, of course, consider the book, but you have enough space that what you're really doing is taking the book as the starting point for an essay on a broad subject. So that I'll put to one side, because that's really the essay, I think, is a separate subject from the one we're discussing tonight. But in the Times book review, in the Times book pages, they used to be called the literary pages. They're now called the book pages. I do, a few times a year, review mainly non-fiction, but also fiction. So it raises the question, what makes a good book review? And as was just mentioned, it's not just about having an opinion. Everyone has an opinion. Opinions, in some ways, are the bane of our age, of our social media age. You don't get any points for having an opinion. Opinion is not even really the starting point. The difference between opinion about books and a book review is form, whatever you take that to mean. In some ways, form is just structure. A piece has to have, in the most basic reckoning, a beginning, a middle, and an end. You need to feel when you read it, however long it is, that the piece is moving forward. Really, what you're doing, as in almost every piece of journalism, is in telling a story about the book, which incorporates your opinions, but isn't just a matter of opinion. And form also, perhaps the most important form that a writer gives to any piece is in their use of language. Language imparts form, the fluency of sentences, the flow of language, the discipline that writing well brings is itself a kind of form. What else do you need in a book review? Reading the book, that certainly helps. I think also, certainly, for a daily newspaper, in some ways, you're doing the same job that Tim is talking about it in the review of a place or an attraction. You need to tell the reader, what it's like, what it's about, and that may involve a certain amount of a plot summary. I'm not averse to spoilers. I think the kind of fetish about not revealing plot details is exaggerated in a lot of cases. I mean, if that's all there is to the book, then it may not be worth reading anyway. As David mentioned, I had a novel published last year, which was not widely reviewed, but there were some reviews. And I found it, and it was the story I was telling was in some ways a thriller, so there was a kind of plot of sorts. But I felt quite frustrated when reviewers kind of began to summarize the story, but then pulled away for fear of spoilers. I don't think it matters that much. There aren't many books that are truly spoiled. The other thing I think that is quite important is quotation. You need to give the reader a sense of how the author writes, and well-chosen quotations are important. There's quite a famous collection of book reviews by John Updike called "Hugging the Shore," which I commend to you. And in the introduction to that, Updike, as well as being a novelist, was a prolific book reviewer, mainly in the New Yorker. And he says in the introduction that he makes the point that in the book you're about to read, about a quarter of the words belong to other people, because he quoted a lot, quite generously. A quarter is probably too much for me. I would say the ideal is about an eighth. But you need to have quotations in there so people get a sense of how the prose sounds. The other thing that one needs to bring is context, which is one way of saying that you need to know something about the subject. You need to know, what you're talking about to some extent. It's not enough just to read the book. You want to be able to put it in its context, to compare or contrast it with other similar books, so that it's more than just the book you're writing about. And of course, opinion and judgment are very important. I think there's no point writing a review which doesn't pass some kind of judgment. In some ways, it's a consumer service you're performing. People need to know, is this worth buying or not, but also why. But opinion and judgment doesn't have to be delivered in an obvious way. You can express your attitude to a book in the way you write about it, as well as just by what you write. It's not only about summing up whether it's thumbs up or thumbs down. And in the end, and this is rather a banal thing to say and is true of every piece of writing, the most important thing is really not what you say, but how you say it. And the only writing that is really worth reading or worth rereading is good writing and a piece that is well written. And if I have to end, it would be to recommend my favourite book reviewer, which is, again, he was a novelist, Martin Amis. And the book that I go to again and again when I'm crafting reviews of Iron is The War Against Cliché by Martin Amis.
Great advice. Yeah. Well, the question. First of all, I advise everybody in the room to go and search out Richard's review of Couches, if you can find it online, and revive that piece for the pleasure of contemporary audiences. The question that comes to mind, I guess, for me listening to the presentations, is I hate to focus on filthy lucre, but can we be paid for what we do? That's one of the key questions. I'm kind of curious about. I love the London Review of Books, and I've read quite a few of Richard's pieces. The circulation for that is about 70,000, right? It's quite a big circulation. So, but I suspect it's falling, like the circulation of a lot of print editions. I may be wrong about that. So, will a reviewer still pay you to go, for example, to Ogasawara, Tim, to write a story like that? Will somebody pay you to make it worthwhile to read a book and bring all your experience and expertise and your writing skills to craft 800 words? Or is it becoming more and more difficult? That's the question I'd like to throw out to all of you, if that's okay.
Well, I can answer those questions about Ogasawara, for example, and writing for this magazine, Literary Review. Yes, they do pay. And yes, a travel website should pay you if it's going to send you down to the Ogasawara Islands to write a travel feature about it. So that's still the case. I'm sure some of them will try to maybe nickel and dime you, maybe pay you less than what you think you deserve. That's why it's very important, if you're a freelancer, to be aware of the going rate for such kinds of writing. And one problem in freelance journalism is that writers don't know what the going rate is. That's why they should join organizations like in Canada, we have a writers association that used to, perhaps still does, publish surveys of its members to see what they're getting paid. So you have this benchmark that you can refer to, like, in Canada, if you're writing for a travel feature for X kind of media, you should be getting so many dollars. So these things are really important. But then again, for every journalist who wants to make a living out of it, there'll be so many perhaps younger journalists who want to break into the trade and who are willing to do it for next to nothing or nothing. So I encourage them not to do that.
Okay. Anybody else, Richard or Steve?
Yeah, the London Review of Books pays really well.
Do you want to say what it is?
Gosh, I can't remember now, but you do a piece for them. I mean, maybe sort of 4,000 or 5,000 words. It's been a few years since I did one. I'm working on one now. You get a couple of £1,000,
okay,
maybe a bit more. So it's proper money, but it does take a really long time. And you want to do it well, and the standard is very high. You can't dash it off. I'm working on a piece now that, I've been working on since November in my spare time, because the kind of, you really need to be informed about the subject. There's a lot of background reading. Writing for the Times book pages, I'm on the staff of the Times, so I'm a salary man. They own me, so I don't get paid any extra for doing that. If you were doing it as a freelance, I think it would be next to impossible to make a living just doing book reviews, because it does take time. I mean, you can review a film after watching it for 90 minutes, but book to read it properly, it takes hours and hours and hours, right? A few hundred pages. There's no way around it, and the rates are not great. So I don't know how. I don't think there's anyone who only who supports himself by doing that.
Right. Okay.
It's interesting your comment about London Review of Books. I used to subscribe to it. I don't subscribe to it anymore because it was taking too much of my time, because it's so well written. The pieces are just so brilliant. And that it brings to mind, your point is very interesting. Quite often the subject is not the book itself so much as just the general context, the general topic rather than the specific book, and that's not a bad thing. That's wonderful. But the ratio between time spent reading the book and the remuneration thereof is not necessarily good in the book reviewing world. The last book review I wrote was of a friend's book, a former student journalism colleague who wrote an account of a memoir, basically. And I wrote it for that fine publication, BC Book World. I wanted to support her more than anything else. And, she had been going through a difficult time in her life, and I thought, well, people should read her book. And then it happened that my review was chosen as the review of the month. So I got, for 800 words, I got the princely sum of $100, right? Not the way to get rich. But the point is that I publicized my friend's book and hopefully provided her with some emotional support. Another interesting aspect of reviewing, and Richard's point is very astute, and that is, everyone has an opinion. You may know the late German critic Walter Benjamin, who established, in his essay, The Concept of Criticism in German Romanticism, which I'm sure we've all read. I haven't. I'm just cherry-picking quotes. And he points out that the purpose of criticism, as opposed to reviews, is to inform, is to not give the author's opinion, but actually to elucidate the subject. And that's something I think we need to be very clear on when we're talking about the art of reviewing, because, as Richard said, everyone's got an opinion, and several probably. But the really difficult part of reviewing or criticism is to, without sounding too pretentious, educate, inform, and delve into the subject, rather than just say, well, I liked it, or it was crap, or whatever. As Walter says, the task of criticism is to make the work's truth, content, an object of experience, and to proceed from the work itself, not from the author's life. And I don't know about the LRB, how often they get into that. I think I think they do a fine job of, well, obviously publishing some very fine writing, but they educate, and it's. I recommend, if you don't know the London Review of Books, it's a marvelous publication. You'll learn a lot. And at the end of the review, you might not even know what the author or what the reviewer thinks of the book. That's not the point, right?
But make sure you have a lot of time to read it, right?
Yeah. It's dense prose and it's wonderful. I mean, it's. It reminds me on a local level. It used to be was it DeWolf? That was the guy who used to write for the Asahi Evening News. He was a movie reviewer, and the reviews weren't about the movies. It was just like him raving about what frustrates him about life in Japan. It was entertaining, but it didn't have much to do with reviewing. So quite often a review is just an excuse, a soapbox, if you will. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with that. But.
Can I pose a philosophical question here? To what degree do you think reviews should be subjective, and can subjectivity be overcome or avoided? What do you guys think?
Who are you asking the question to, Tim?
Anyone?
Well, if I just remember the first things I ever read, in terms of reviews, it was the NME. Do you remember the New Musical Express? I used to love the New Musical Express, and it was full of really opinionated writers like Julie Burchill, Nick Kent.
Morrissey from the Smiths used to write
Yeah.
scathing. Right?
Yeah, so like the reviews were often more about the writer than what they were reviewing, but the writing was so nice and the attitude was so in your face that they inspired you to go out and get the stuff that they were talking about, the records, the
It was
books.
Lester Bangs writing for Cream, in the States, and it's, again, highly opinionated, highly subjective, but fun to read, right? And yeah, I don't know how informative they were, but yeah.
Anyway, leave it to Steve to introduce the Frankfurt School into the conversation. Wow, that's pretty
Yeah,
arrogant.
I don't
You
think
missed-
he was a member of the Frankfurt School. I don't
Walter
think he was a
Benjamin?
Frankfurter, no.
Huh?
You missed your chance to do your German accent, Steve.
I don't think the room's ready for it yet.
Okay, we've been talking along and for a long time, and of course we can talk forever,
Yeah.
So let's throw it open to the room. If anybody has a question or a comment, we can, as I said, treat it very collegially. You can address any point you've heard or bring up another point, anything that pertains to journalism and what we do and what we might do. And please use the mic, just to make it even more intimidating. Actually, maybe we could bring the mic to you. If you don't fancy standing at the mic, you could maybe move the mic around the table. That's totally fine as well. Don't be shy.
He just said, "Don't be shy."
Those are.
This isn't so much a question, or maybe it leads to one, but more a comment. My all-time favorite reviewer of any arts is Roger Ebert. Was. I'm from Chicago, so grew up with him. But I still go back to it as a writer, and it's a great way to think about writing, to watch his, the way he does it. And regarding your subjectivity conversation, it reminded me of him, and I think he was very subjective, but his criteria was consistent, and he left you with some very entertaining criteria that he always went back to, like idiot plot, which is a story that relies on the hero being an idiot and not seeing what's going on around him, or is this movie better than a documentary about these actors having lunch? And a lot of good criteria that led you to it. You don't realize it's subjective. It's just you're used to his criteria, and you want to see if the movie meets that criteria. And I thought that was just amazing that he could build up that criteria so memorably. That's what made him great.
Yeah, what amazes me about reviews like that, who keep it up over a whole lifetime, reviewing, presumably 3 or 4 films a week, it must be such an effort to remain fresh and, to convey the impression, as he always seemed to, that he still enjoyed doing his job, because they were really quite short, those reviews, weren't they? Yeah. Some of them very tight indeed. I don't know how anyone manages that. I don't think I could do it as a full-time job.
But the thing about subjectivity is really interesting, isn't it? Because, arguably the greatest modern film critic was Pauline Kael of The New Yorker. But if you go back and read her stuff, she was just all over the place, dismissing sort of movies that are now considered great works of art, right? Famously hated Clint Eastwood and everything he did, dissed a lot of the great 70s movies. But she is fated, right? She brought subjectivity and attitude, but she also brought I guess she gets away with it because she put in her dues. She knew what she was talking about. And she watched a lot of movies, certainly more than we're going to watch, and could discuss it in an entertaining way, right?
But the thing is, she was back to your point, writing for such a long time, these people become reference points, right? So Pauline Kael hates this. Well, I must like it, right? Because I know where she's coming from. She's prejudiced, right? And reviewers can just be plain wrong. I mean, that's a subjective opinion. But if I know if this person is a known quantity, then I can, orient my tastes vis-a-vis them. So, they hated this, I liked it, so they're hating this next movie. Well, maybe the odds are I'm going to like it. It works that way, right? I have a collection of Rolling Stone record reviews from the 70s, and I read it, and my God, it's just, a lot of it's just garbage, right? especially they hate Paul McCartney, right? And they prejudiced me against Paul McCartney for a long time, right? And for example, the album Ram, I really like it now, right? But in the 70s, like, oh, wow, you like that? You're an idiot, right? That's where opinion overtook objectivity or actual information. So, the reviewers have a role to play, but not necessarily in the way that you might think.
The pole of hate. Those are-
I don't know what an objective book review would look like, really. Would it have like charts and pie charts and measurements?
You'd have to ask
don't know
AI.
such
You have
thing.
to ask AI, right?
Written by Spock.
Perhaps the goal should be not objectivity but fairness, which of course can't be objectively defined.
That was one point I was going to make myself, actually, in this review I spoke about earlier with the cranes in Japan that I was negative about. I should have added that I think if you're going to write a negative review, you should at least be fair. And that includes perhaps suggesting what the author did that was good or impressive or you liked. But if there are things that the author did that you just thought were too much, point those out, absolutely, but be fair and talk about the good points too. I think should be a more balanced approach.
What's the meanest thing you've ever written in a review?
I just pointed out that cranes don't fly in one shoe.
It's not very-
The author looked really silly.
Well, that's an interesting question. The meanest thing, all right?
I'm a bit ashamed of this, and it was actually a book written by a member of this club. He's not a member anymore. It's a long time ago. As well as commenting on the book, I commented on the photograph of the author on the cover.
Oh, dear.
And I described him as looking like a self-satisfied chipmunk.
I think I remember.
That
I think I
wasn't
know who
fair.
that was.
That
Yeah,
wasn't
I
That's
think
a
I
sort
know
of
who that
ad hominem thing that
Although he was,
you should not.
he did look exactly like a self-satisfied chipmunk, objectively.
Luckily he's
I
not
hope
here.
he took it in the spirit in which it was meant. Right? Yeah. Gee.
That was shortly after my sofa debacle, so I was young and foolish.
Another one to seek out. Any more comments, questions? Those all? Feel free.
Thank you for your thoughts. Very interesting indeed. So I, on a semi-regular basis, write hotel reviews
Nice.
for a travel trade publication. So it's not your general reader, it's readers who are in the travel industry, B2B. And I've been doing this for some years. So sometimes the hotels I'm asked to review are not so different from each other. I'm wondering if you have any bits of advice to help me keep it fresh, looking at different perspectives, different ideas, and perhaps that's something that you've experienced if you've reviewed something and you think, gosh, this is quite similar to what I've already reviewed before. So how do you tackle that? Thank you.
Personally, I've done this many times, so many hotels in Shibuya, for instance, and so I would focus on differentiators. Is one closer to the station, more convenient, cleaner? All those things. I went to a hotel in Sapporo that, now it's not such a big deal, but at the time I was surprised to see every room at a turntable with vinyl records. You could borrow vinyl records at the lobby, and that was kind of cool. So these things that make them stand out, but it does get to be a real grind because so many hotels are designed with this identikit template, the unit bath and all this sort of thing, and they all have the same design, and so you have to look a bit harder for the things that make it different and point those out. And then you can also talk about value, how much you're paying for the experience compared to distance and convenience, and maybe the breakfast buffet is a little bit better because they have locally made croissants. Or who knows? I would focus on those things because these veteran industry travelers, as you know, they spot all these things right away. So be it the way they're welcomed at the front desk, the time it takes to check in or not, any courtesy services they receive would be differentiators in my mind.
So, Tim, these hotels that you review in Shibuya, are these hotels where you stay overnight or just for a few hours?
See that one?
Yes, we won't talk about that. Yeah.
So you talk about the mirrors on the ceiling, like
Exactly. Yeah, the
vibrating bed.
yes.
Keep it clean. Keep it clean.
Some of them have, well, I've only heard this, but so you hand it to the designers of these love hotels to. There was one in which, if you're being unfaithful to your spouse, the hotel actually had an in-room sound service in which you could select traffic noises. So you click the button and it plays traffic noises, and you can call your, "Hi, honey, I have to go to a meeting. I'm actually in between, the office and someplace, and it's really noisy traffic here. Sorry, but I'll be home later. Bye." This kind of thing, like unbelievable.
That's the kind of detail you can't get anywhere, right?
I would say, to your point, I've never reviewed a hotel of any kind in my life, but rule one of journalism, to belabor the absolutely obvious, tell it like it is. And the other point is, put yourself in the position of the person who you think is going to be your reader, and that again applies to every form of writing. But I don't know what your target audience is, but take yourself out of the equation. That's what every writer should do.
Richard, have you ever reviewed a hotel that you want to impart?
I've never reviewed a hotel. No,
You're strictly a furniture man,
I am.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I draw the line at the soft furnishings.
Well, so far so good. I just had to say that. Thanks. Oh, dear.
John?
This one.
I reviewed a hotel, but unfortunately it came with an interview with Gordon Ramsay, the chef, the celebrity chef.
Yeah.
So they both came together. The stay in the hotel was really nice. The interview not so nice. Those are John.
So I guess I had a question about, because we're talking as if everyone is reading reviews or writing them. Would that was the world we were living in? I mean, I think the vast majority of the world's population are not reading reviews, and I'm just interested in the question of how can we make writing about culture and the changes in culture exciting enough for people to be wanting to read it and share it. I mean, it was very interesting for me. I have no clue what the Super Bowl really is, but that Bad Bunny performance and the fact that everyone, all my Latino friends, everyone wanted to talk about it, that was great because it meant, yes, the whole world was interested in culture. So that's a question I have to all of you. How can we make this a bigger world?
Yeah, I noticed, among the very many depressing aspects of the story about the Washington Post the other week, I noticed they closed their book section.
Yeah.
Which had been, along with much else, unthinkable until really quite recently. And I don't know, I mean, someone must read reviews because newspapers keep publishing them, and these days, on online websites, you can see exactly how many people are reading it and how many eyeballs are on it for how long. So I assume that people do read them. If I have a review in the Times, it certainly attracts a lot fewer comments at the bottom than pieces in the foreign news section, which I generally write for. And that's, I think, often an indication of the number of readers. So I don't know, really. I mean,
But there is a real question there, isn't there? I mean, presumably the readers of the Times are middle-aged or old, or are they? Is that my
they're
prejudice?
on the cutting edge of youthful fashion.
Well, on the cutting edge of my university, students don't read newspapers anymore, right? They just don't, and they're fairly upfront about it. They read, they read TikTok.
You can read TikTok?
Well, yes, you can, believe it or not, but they
Just information.
What do I know?
from
they flick through reviews, right? And their attention spans are much shorter. Nobody's going to sit through a 2,000 review. So it does kind of raise questions for people like us, right? People who do this for a living. Can you grab the attention of young people? How do you grab their attention? Do you have to dumb down? Do you have to do what I do, write 300-word reviews for a fairly complex book? How do we speak to the times?
How many people here read books regularly? Okay. How many people read Amazon reviews of books?
Yep.
Or Goodreads, right? I find it's amazing. It's a whole genre that's developed, that's halfway between just sort of vox pop type, man on the street reviews and professional reviews. I'm amazed by the quality of the reviews on Amazon. Again, I find them informative. And again, people aren't being paid, right? They're supplying content to Mr. Bezos for free, right? But yeah, it's halfway between like your random restaurant review and something in the Times or the LRB. It's democratic in the best sense of the word, but it does affect our business model, I suppose. They're not reviewed. Reviews should be looked at by an editor, I suppose, but ones on Amazon aren't. Yeah, it's set up. I think it's good for the book reading trade and the literary culture in general that people are expressing themselves. But the question is, what is the standard? But I'm amazed by the literary quality of some of these reviews on Amazon, I must say.
The free literary reviews.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah.
Anybody else? Comment? Question? Tim, would you want to?
I was going to say, to your point about culture. By the way, if people are interested in culture, there's an event happening tomorrow evening at Asia Society about David Marks has a new book out about the death of pop culture, or how it's become all repetitive and it's I think his book is called Blank Space, perhaps. Anyway, that's happening tomorrow night. I was going to say that even though we may lament the popular approach or neglect of book reviews, things like that, when I look at magazines like Literary Review or LRB or whatever, I find that, wow, there's so many book lovers that are still out there, and these are people who deeply love complex written accounts of history, biography, etc., poetry, and there's a great community out there, and it should be a source of encouragement to us, even though we may, feel bad about the rise of TikTok. So I would say if you want to write reviews, join the community. Pitch a review to a magazine or a newspaper, and see if you can start doing it yourself as a professional or semi-professional part-time reviewer. Why not? Go for it.
Who would you pitch to if you were starting off, Tim?
Well, here in Tokyo, you could try the Japan Times, but it's really not easy. I think we were talking about this before. They may not respond. I've just written a review for them that's coming out about this new book by Tom Feeling, who is a British author. He wrote a book called Alone in Japan, and it's sort of a travelogue through the demographic crisis of Japan. So he used to work here as an English teacher back in the 90s, and he comes back here around 2017 or 18, and jumps into why Japan has lost its mojo. And so it's a combination of interviews and analysis, and it is quite a very interesting book, I must say. So that's coming out in Japan Times, but I don't write for them too often, but it's one source where you could try. Where else could you try to do
What about
reviews?
Literary Review?
You could try them. A lot of people, it seems to be mostly, a lot of academics seem to write for it, authors as well, some journalists. I just got in it through a friend who was writing years ago for them. But there's some wonderful reviews in here with a broad range of subjects like history, biography, you name it. And so this may be a bit more difficult. It's in another country, but I would maybe start locally and then go from there.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Comment, question? どうぞ.
I feel reviewers tend to ground their commentary about works in author's personal life, or the composer's personal life, or director's personal life. Is this mainly because it is really helpful for deeper understanding, or it is very appealing for general public? I think this is very classical, like Saint-Beuve versus Proust. So any thoughts, any comments?
Did you personalize your views? どうぞ.
The question is relevance, right? To what extent? If we know that Gustav Mahler was having an affair or was sick or whatever, did this affect this or that symphony? I mean,
Like Beethoven or
Yeah, he was deaf, right? I mean, personal detail is relevant, but it can degenerate into gossip and just or cocktail party chatter. I met the author last week at this reception, and he said, logical relevance, that's the category, I would say.
That's a good answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a debate in critical studies. I think in all areas of the arts is, to what extent is biography relevant? And I think you can argue that it's not relevant at all. What you should look at is the text, whether it's the book or the piece of music or the poem or the building, if you're talking about architecture. But of course, in real life, and certainly in the mass media, people are interested in biography, which is to say they're interested in gossip. So if you're writing for the mass media, I don't think you can leave out the biographical element.
Look at Alice Munro in our own country, Canada, the huge controversy about her. And that's where it gets really muddy, really messy, because I'm not a huge reader of her, but this is a Canadian author. She won the Nobel Prize for Literature, did she not? I'm trying to remember, but it came out that she countenanced or turned a blind eye to this abusive relationship between her daughter and her second husband. Yeah. And so insofar as she was a feminist author, I don't want to just lump her into that category, it seemed to contradict what actually happened in her life experience. And so there's this critical reappraisal of her. And I agree with Richard that, you take the Oscar Wilde point of view, art is art and it's pure and should have nothing to do with the real world. I don't know about that, but her, bona fides as an author were severely criticized because of what she actually did in her life. And so if I go back to her stories, am I going to read them in a different way? I don't know. It's a tricky question.
I did a bunch of literary reviews for The Guardian a few years back. Sayaka Murata, I don't know if you know her, Convenience Store Woman. She wrote that book, which is a big bestseller. And it's very hard to talk about her life separate from the books, because she spent, 16 years working in a convenience store. And that's what she mined to write the book. And her kind of personality infuses all of what she writes. She goes home alone. She shuns personal relationships. Her friends are a menagerie of dolls and so on. Mieko Kawakami is another writer, a very famous writer in Japan. Again, very, very hard to separate what she writes from her feminism, from her attitudes towards life, and from her experiences, right? Because she grew up poor, working class. She had all these nasty experiences with men. She worked as a hostess, and all of that again feeds into her work. So I don't see how you could write something about those people without talking about their lives. I don't see how it's possible.
There is an argument that you can, not to be a dick about it, but Sayaka Murata and Mieko Kawakami.
I'd never think of you as a dick, Richard.
We think we know things about them because they give interviews and so on, but you don't know. You don't know who they are and what they're like really. Sure. Supposing it turned out that, Sayaka Murata was actually a 73-year-old Canadian schoolmaster from Vancouver who'd just been writing these books and pretending to be a Japanese woman called Sayaka Murata because it was a good story. I know that's not likely, but imagine that. Would the books be changed at all? No, they wouldn't. The text would be exactly the same.
Sure.
Well, the text would be the same, but your interpretation and the meaning of the text would change dramatically. I mean, imagine trying to read Yukio Mishima without the context of his own life. Like, his was like life imitating art, his life and death, of course. So I think it's, as an abstract exercise, yes, you can do it, but understanding and appreciating the art itself is so much more meaningful and enriching if you have understanding of the current in which this person lived and his or her life. That's how I feel anyway.
Well, there's also the question of authenticity. I mean, the great kind of unspoken quality people look for in arts, right, novels and so on, is authenticity, and that comes from lived experience, how people live their lives. You know, you can fake it, but it's very hard, right?
It depends on the subject matter. Like I like science fiction, right? And how many science fiction writers have been to the moon, right? Not a lot. But in that case, genre fiction, you know, is their scientific knowledge sound insofar as their book is based on some sort of scientific or, you know, factual scenario. But yeah, if you wrote about John Lennon, right? Remember in the Yoko Ono essay in our soon-to-be published book, plug here, Japanese Rebels. And the song Imagine, where he says, imagine no possessions. Meanwhile, Yoko Ono's got a room full of her fur coats. It's, you know, it's a refrigerated room. So, and his response, people said, how can you write about, you know, imagine no possessions and you're living this life of luxury? And he says, it's only a bloody song. Well,
Sounds better in Liverpool. It's only a bloody song.
I didn't want to lapse into the accent. I thought I'd leave that to you, but you did a great job there, right? So, yeah. So it's not an absolute dichotomy. It's not black or white. There's this dialogue, I guess, for want or conversation between the work and the creator's life, and to what extent that informs your opinion of, or, you know, take on the work is up to you. It's interesting. You mentioned Mishima, and there's a guy for whom life and art are like that. But if a man from Mars came down and started reading Yukio Mishima, knowing nothing about Japan, nothing about his life, would that person experience the book in the same way that you or I do? No, but they might see it in a very new and original way. Those are beautiful books. They're well written, but you know,
So-
art exists in a context always, right?
Science fiction fan, right? Do you think you can understand Philip K. Dick without knowing that he was very fond of hallucinogenic drugs?
I think speed was more his forte, but yeah, here's a good. That's interesting. The way I got turned on to Philip K. Dick was reading a piece by Paul Williams in Rolling Stone in the mid-'70s, and I liked science fiction, but I'd never heard of Philip K. Dick. And I read this brilliant expository piece in Rolling Stone. I thought, wow, this is it. This is for me. And
That
then I
turned you
became
on,
a
right?
fan.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that he was prone to taking huge amounts of drugs. It became fairly obvious once I read his stuff, right? But I'm sure I would have enjoyed it regardless.
Right.
I disagree with everything the rest of you have said.
Well, that's just your opinion, man.
let me give you an example.
Everyone's got one.
What about authors about whom we know very little of their lives? For example, Shakespeare. Right. So there are huge gaps. There just isn't any evidence, never will be. But imagine a situation where someone dug around and they discovered something absolutely terrible about Shakespeare. So imagine he'd been a violent, abusive. Imagine that for years, it was documented, absolutely proved that Shakespeare had tortured cats to death for pleasure. Right? Now that would teach us various things. That would change various disciplines. One of them being the history of cats in the 16th century. But the one thing that wouldn't change would be King Lear. That would remain completely unchanged.
Well, again, if there were cats mentioned in King Lear, it would be relevant. But it's a question of relevance. I mean, it
wouldn't change anything. It would still be King Lear, and nothing that has been written or observed about King Lear, for good or bad, would have any more or less significance because of a new discovery about Shakespeare's life.
I'm being facetious, Richard, but I mean, if a point in King Lear does not contain any mention of the feline species, as far as I know, but if there were a character in King Lear who was, you know, fawning over cats, was really nice to cats, and then we found out that Shakespeare had abused cats, then we would say, well, Shakespeare was talking out of his rear end, right? It would detract somewhat from the work, but there's no mention of cats in King Lear, so your point is valid. It would hold up.
But there is a kind of genre of revisionist or retroactive reviews, right, where they go back and study people in the light of new evidence. I mean, I'm thinking of, let me see, George Orwell, I guess, right? George Orwell was There's been recent claims that he exploited his wife, right? He was a socialist, he was all of those things. But
Wife too, you mean? Sonia?
wife,
Yeah, Eileen.
Eileen, yeah.
Oh, Eileen,
That's
okay.
history. That's not literary study.
But you have read those reviews, right, where they go back and reinterpret what he wrote in light of the fact that they've discovered new evidence about his personal life, right? That's a thing, you know.
Yeah, that's the discipline of biography.
Right.
But it's not textual criticism, is it?
It doesn't affect the books.
Well, I don't think it should. I mean, as we were saying, it does, because we're all human and we love gossip. But
But
I
with,
don't
with,
think it
Shake-
needs to.
with Shakespeare, I mean, there's the authorship controversy. Earl of Oxford, you may be familiar with that, and there are a lot of parallels between the Earl of Oxford and Hamlet, for example. Now, does that give us a greater understanding of Hamlet to know that there may be some autobiographical element in the play? Maybe, but it adds to our to our appreciation, perhaps, but it doesn't subtract from our enjoyment of the play as a pure work of art. Right?
Anyway, don't let us rabbit on.
Well, we can.
This is what we do. So please feel free to ask a question, to make a comment, or to join in the discussion. I mean, you've just heard what we've been talking about, and it's always great to have a disagreement.
Okay, Mark is not here, but often I've been at events where Mark will get the prime seat at a film
Mark.
screening. Shilling.
Oh, Mark Schilling.
He'll get the prime seat at a screening, sitting right there. The director is there, the producer is there, and the actress is there, and he's got to review the movie, right? So how do you guys handle that when you're getting heavy eye pressure from the subject matter?
It's a great question.
Whoa.
That was my question for Mark, but you can answer on his behalf.
I've never been in that situation, so I couldn't say.
Well, there's an ancient and dishonourable tradition in Fleet Street journalism of what's referred to as log rolling. I don't know why it's called log rolling, but that refers to giving very good reviews to people you know and like and want to help out. And I suppose the converse of that is vicious reviews of people you dislike for non-literary reasons. But actually, I was quite surprised to discover this because, I mean, every year people, produce surveys pointing out how the magazine Private Eye every year does a survey of book reviews and how people who were best friends at university review one another's books very well. But actually, our current books editor, has a rule that if you know the author of a book, then you can't review it. So, for example, Tom Feeling's book, I was asked if I wanted to review that, and I had to say I don't know him very well, but I have met him and I know him, and I feel I couldn't be completely objective.
But do you think...
Maybe a better way to ask this is...
Use the mic, because it won't pick up. Yeah.
Maybe a better way to ask this is if you do a review or you're having a review, you may need to have access to that person in the future, right? And then what are you going to do about that? Like maybe politics is a better example. I actually had lunch with Ken Belson today, who was here 2 weeks ago. Same thing, right? He's got to write in the NFL, but he needs access to owners. He loses access to owners. He doesn't have any nothing to write about. So kind of the same thing maybe you guys experience as well.
Well, you definitely experience that writing about politics. This is not reviewing, but yeah, if you adopt a tone of hostility towards politicians, right, then you can find your access blocked. That's certainly true from personal experience. But that's not something I think that you can let bother you, or if it doesn't bother you, maybe, but certainly it shouldn't stop you writing what you think you have to write. Yeah. As for reviews, I don't know. I've never had to write a hostile review. I mean, I wrote a hostile interview with Imelda Marcos one time, but she was thousands of miles away.
So like you're coming, you hope you like the movie, but it sucked, right? What are you going to say? Like you're supposed to, review the movie. You thought it was terrible, but the director's right there.
I think any journalist worth his or her salt will stick to his or her principles, will not compromise. If that leads to some uncomfortable situations, that's unfortunate. But I think ultimately the people who are making movies, the producers, etc., will respect you more if you stick to your guns, if you are independent and you don't cave just because you want to have better connections in the future. So I would recommend, no matter what position you're in, just stick to your guns and don't compromise.
Truth to power.
Or at least lay your cards on the table. I mean, I understand what you're saying about, not being eligible to write a review if you know the author. I mean, that's a pretty hard line, but there is another possibility, which is to say, well, I know this person, full disclosure. We see a lot of that. I see that line popping up again and again. I know this person, had lunch with them last week, but their latest book is a piece of crap. Maybe you're not going to have lunch with them again, but yeah, exactly, right. But in that case, it's a dialogue perhaps with the writer or the author or whoever. They may take that criticism in the right way and move on to higher things. No, they won't. Okay.
Dozo.
Another question. I'm a self-published author, and I'm very curious about any of your perspectives on, like, the difference. Like I'm from the U.S. A lot of the top authors these days, I mean, a majority of them you will see coming out of the self-publishing ranks and skipping the whole traditional publishing route, literary agent that was around, mostly 20th century model. And you really don't see that from my perspective in Japan. It's just not, for even, the Japanese market, let alone the foreign market, who might be more aware of what goes on in the West. Even here at the FCCJ, they did a how to publish a book in Japan event last year.
That's right. Yeah.
All talking about traditional publishing models. And I was like, boy, that's really, I thought a little bit, there's a new perspective on this. Like, what if this convenience store woman hadn't, landed a traditional publishing deal? How many people are there like her that have stories? And do you search for that in your job? Is the unpublishing or that self-publishing authors, is that something that's even on your radar, or is it something that's really important? It has to be traditionally published for your publications?
That's a great question. I think that there's a sort of inherent discrimination against self-published authors. For example, if an editor at this magazine is interested in a book, he or she will go to publishing houses to get copies, review copies. That he or she will be attuned to what's coming out of traditional publishing houses. To my experience, they're not looking at self-published authors and what they're turning out. That's just sort of baked into the system, unfortunately. That's the old system. But, I went to that event you're talking about as well. It was very interesting. They didn't really talk about self-publishing. That being said, however, there are a lot of successful authors from Japan and who have lived in Japan who have done some self-publishing. I'm thinking of, guidebook kind of things, like, great ways to get the best out of Tokyo or Japan. Or there's a lot of self-published stuff in that genre. So, what about you guys? Have you seen good self-published stuff out of Japan?
Yeah, I mean, in the Times Books pages, I don't think I've never seen a self-published book of any kind reviewed there. The exception might be if there's one that has kind of independently become noteworthy or notorious, or there's some other reason it's a kind of news story. And the reason for that is, I suppose you could call it prejudice, but it's also just practicality. So to give you an example, the Times Books editor it's an open plan office, but he has his own little room, a kind of cubicle, and it's entirely full of books, filling shelves, stacked on the floor on all the tables. And those are just books that have been published by, as you call them, traditional publishers. There's just a mass. I mean, of course, he has maybe 15, 20 books that he can cover a week, including his pages. He doesn't have time to do more than glance at the books he's being sent by established publishers. If you include self-published books as well, it's just impossible. No human institution could process all of those, just to the extent of deciding, is this worth reviewing? Is it worth sending to someone? So, the traditional system, as you call it, acts as a filter. Any book and any author's work has to get past several stages and jump through several hoops. So it's usually at first it's an agent. An agent has to look at it and say, yeah, look, I could sell this. I can think of publishers who'd like this. And then the agent takes it to maybe a number of editors, and they think about it, and some pass, and some say, well, we're interested, maybe, you know, we can make you an offer. And then the agent can say, well, I want more, I'm going to go somewhere else. And then it goes through an editing process. Someone reads it, works with the author to reshape it, improve it. The marketing people have to chip in. They're consulted before it's commissioned. You know, is this a book we can sell? So that's the defense of the traditional system, that the filters screen out stuff that literary editors then don't have to spend their time thinking about. And undoubtedly, there's good stuff that doesn't get through. But without that system, I don't know how you could review books, really, because you can't take everything into account.
I think Miyako Kawakami's book, Chichitoran, was that it? The Japanese version? Breast and Eggs, began as a blog. I think she published that initially as a blog, and then it sort of reached a critical mass, you know, many, many readers. And then it was officially published, and then she built on that and wrote a second book. You know, so there is that precedent in Japan.
I mean, other people may know more about this than I, but my sense is that in Japan, books, certainly fiction, tends to get commissioned from people who've appeared in magazines, right? So the big publishing houses,
or have a track record,
Kodansha and so on, they have their in-house literary journals, you know, some highbrow, some more popular. And so you get a story or an extract published there first.
Right.
And then you get picked up by an editor to commission a book.
Or you bring your followers, right?
You bring your followers, yeah. If you built up a significant following, yeah. Well, I've had a book on my desktop for like 10 years. It's a book about the media, and it's in Japanese. And I have often thought about putting it online, you know, self-publishing, but I'm just afraid to, because when an editor looks at it, they say you can't write that, you know, because it'll get you into trouble. So we've just been through like months and months of proofreading and checking and all that, and I need that sort of not just the cachet that brings, but also the checking, right, the proofing. The filtering, as Richard says, to make sure that it goes out into the world in the best possible shape.
The rigor. David and I have a book coming out, and we were thinking of going the self-publishing route at one point, and I instinctually rebelled against it because for ego, right? Because I wanted the book to be published by a reputable publisher, and we tried a few publishers, and you know the idea was rejected, and we eventually found one. But had we not done that, David, you know, we wouldn't have had that rigor, that pair of fresh eyes, or you know, sense of discipline, and it wouldn't have been as good a book.
Sting in the tail, though, Michael, is that the book costs £160.
Worth every penny.
Right. So, I mean, I'd kind of like to hear your experience. I mean, you can publish these books. They do well.
Well, one thing I wanted to bring awareness here is that when I say self-publishing, I'm not talking about vanity publishing where you're turning a blog into a book and just throwing it into print on demand and throwing it out there without going through that filtering process yourself.
Right.
Which is all available on a freelance basis.
Huh.
I can get a Random House former editor to edit my book.
Oh, that's a good point.
Interesting.
And I do hire editors, proofreaders.
But you pay.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So all of that is you do out of pocket, but you keep 70% of the royalty.
Right.
And do your own marketing. But that's where the difference is self-published authors who are professional, they do hire all those quality pieces to it, including cover design, pay out of pocket, or sometimes give royalty, you know, split it. But you have to be a good marketer. Almost, yeah, it's more important to be a good marketer than it is to be a good writer in some cases. So it's a part of the game that is not the case in traditional publishing, where you're just writing and then you hand over most of that to the publishing house.
Okay. Well, one to think about, I guess. We have time for one more question or a comment, if anybody feels the urge.
Someone who hasn't spoken yet, don't be shy.
those all.
Thank you. I have a very basic question about a structure. If you suppose if you have like only 300 words, then how could that structure be?
Oh, even 300 words can be structured. Yeah.
Yeah. So the maybe how many parts would you like divide? You know, those 300 words into like how many phrases or how many sentences, or you might start with a beginning and end with a conclusion, and in between those paragraphs, how would you write about within those like 200 words maybe?
Yeah, it's difficult to say in the abstract. I don't really know how to answer that, do you?
I would say, 300 words is very short, of course, but as Richard was saying before, you want to convey some, example of the prose of the author, a sample of his or her writing, for instance. So let's say you came across a quote in the book that you're reviewing, and you found it's a very impactful, meaningful, compelling quote. You would stick that in, right? That's going to take up, 50 words or something, maybe more. Then you want to introduce the work itself, talk about the author maybe a little bit in the outline of you don't have many words left at all. So before you know it, you'll be at 300 words, I think, yeah.
The way I would approach it is don't think of the 300 words. Think of it as a span of time. You're sitting down with somebody and you have this amount of time to tell them about the book or whatever it is. What would you say, right? Just get to the point, right? And that really is a good thing for all writers to remember. Just don't think of your writing. Put yourself in the position of the person to whom you address the piece or whom you're talking to. Like, so you're saying that they say, "What's the book about?" Da 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 da, and it flows out naturally. That's the best answer I can give.
Yeah, but also make sure people start reading something that's interesting. Like the first couple of sentences you write, they've got to grab people, right? Make them want to read the rest. That's one of the tricks of the trade, I guess.
Well,
How do you do that?
start off with a good lead, yeah.
A good lead
Right.
or a hook.
Well, that reminds me that one of my favorite reviews, I think I can say the SHIT word here, but Greil Marcus in Rolling Stone, his immortal lead for his review of Self-Portrait by Bob Dylan was 3 words. What is this shit? Right?
That's 4.
And then several thousand words later,
Right.
he got to the point.
Right. Those all.
Yeah, just with remaining time, but I work as a producer for the English media in Taiwan, and I'm just wondering how competitive Japan's market is for the things you are interested in and want to review, and in terms of because I assume most of your audience are English speaking or for foreigners, and just how concentrated how do you look to find those stories or things that are special in your
You saved the easiest question to last.
I think to some extent, if you're talking about books, you're driven by the publishing schedule, right? A new book about Fukushima may be coming out. That's a great opportunity for you to write a book review, right? So you jump on those things that you see coming out. You have to have your radar tuned to publishing houses. Could be universities. The University of Hawaii, for example, publishes quite a few books about Japan. So if you have, I know as a writer, it's always useful to have a sort of niche or a specialty. You don't have to be strict about it, but the more knowledge you accumulate in a certain field, the more you will be aware of events that will turn into possible reviews or articles or whatever. So I would focus on what you're interested in and look for news and then pitch editors about that.
Anybody else want to have a go at answering that? It's a tricky one, isn't it?
I couldn't do better than that.
I defer to Tim.
All right. Well, with that, we are at a time, and I've been told to stick strictly to the time. So with that, we'll end it there. Thanks so much to Richard, to Steve, and to Tim for what I hope was a stimulating and interesting discussion. Hopefully, we've inspired you to go out and read a review, or at least the one Richard wrote about couches, which I'm going to try and find later. Thank you very much, and do show your appreciation for the three panelists. Thanks so much.